And in episode 6, that train is quickly approaching and it leaves Gus, Bear, and Tommy sprinting looking for a way on. Gus and Bear are able to find a way on, but Tommy is having trouble keeping up with the train. And both Gus and Bear head to the caboose of the train, imploring Tommy to hop on. Tommy harnesses that old football player and dives, narrowly grabbing onto the last part of the train and climbing up. And when they enter the train, they notice that this isn't just a normal train. There are no passengers. It's outfitted for just the staff and the staff only. So they start looking throughout the train and it's just full of a bunch of supplies. And to kill time, Bear shows Gus all of the wildlife that they're passing. With most humans killed off, suddenly the Midwest looks a lot like Africa with elephants, zebras, giraffes. Bear then suggests that they play a game of I Spy, and she starts teaching Gus how to play it, saying that she used to play it when she was Gus's age all the time. Her baby sister loved it even though her baby sister didn't really understand it. And Gus says to her, I had no idea you had a sister. You must miss her a lot. And in fact, Bear does. To make her feel better, Gus lets her know, I miss Pubba too. He then starts telling Bear all about the dream that he had when he fell, meeting Pubba, and how Pubba made him Dog for his birthday. Bear asks to see Dog, but when Gus looks in his bag, Dog is missing. He's beside himself, and they try to calm him down, saying, it must have fallen somewhere in the train, don't worry, we'll find it. But before the three of them can look through the train for Dog, they hear somebody coming, and they're forced to hide. It looks to be just a maintenance man on the train, and he doesn't seem to have a clue that they're there. But then Gus drops something out of his bag, and that tips off the guy that there are stowaways on the train. He ends up finding Gus and grabbing him, and that's when Tommy leaps into action fighting the guy off. And both Tommy and this railroad worker start swinging haymakers at each other. They're both really big guys. But then suddenly they recognize each other because they used to be teammates in pro football. Tommy a defensive tackle, this guy a defensive end. So suddenly they go from fighting to hugging it out, catching up. Tommy then introduces Bear to his old teammate, Jimmy. Both Tommy and Jimmy continue to catch up, but then all of a sudden, Bear and Tommy notice that Gus is nowhere to be found, and they get really worried when they see a door open, figuring that Gus must have continued onto the train looking for Dog. Tommy, Bear, and Jimmy start making their way through the train looking for Gus. Throughout this process, Bear notices that they're hauling a lot of candy bars. But while there's tons of candy bars, Gus is nowhere to be found. Jimmy makes an offhanded comment to Tommy saying, your boy's quite the troublemaker, huh? I think Louisa was still pregnant the last time that I saw you. And you can tell that Tommy gets pretty upset by this comment, and he cuts Jimmy off and says, Gus is not my kid. Jimmy then asks Tommy what happened to Louisa and the baby, and Tommy has to tell him they're gone. Jimmy says, sorry, T. Did the sick get him? But Tommy doesn't answer that question. And then he asks him, what's up with the deer kid? And Tommy says, he's just a kid. I'm trying to help. And Jimmy says, that doesn't sound like the Jep I remember. The Jep I remember was all about himself. But as the two are discussing this, all of a sudden, Gus comes out of nowhere. He lets Tommy know that he looked far and wide for Dog and he couldn't find him. Tommy promises to get him another one, but Gus says, you don't understand. Pubba made Dog out of his own socks. It even still smells like him. Tommy doesn't really know how to answer that, but luckily for him, he notices outside of the window that they've just passed into Colorado. And he shows Gus, and that does boost his spirits. Tommy just says aloud, all we have to figure out now is where the hell Go-Grow is. And luckily, Jimmy knows where Go-Grow is. He opens up his itinerary and says, it's short for Gosgrove, but nobody calls it that. They all call it Go-Grove. It's a neighborhood right outside Essex City. And luckily for them, that's the next stop. But then Bear comes back. She was looking all over for Gus, and while she didn't find Gus, what she did find was a bunch of last men, and they're coming up train. Tommy looks at Jimmy like, dude, what the hell? Why didn't you tell me? And Jimmy, who is clearly dealing with some CTE, says, I thought I told you. This is their charter. They're moving operations south, including the candy bars. Bear wants to fight him off, but Tommy says, no, we don't know how many there are. And that's when Jimmy says, follow me. He continues to lead them down train until there's nowhere else to go. And Jimmy says, I'll just tell them that nobody's here. They'll believe me. But Tommy says, you're not exactly convincing. Bear says their only option is to jump, and it looks like that is indeed the case. But then, as the last men, who are in the very next car, start looking through it, Tommy notices through the window that Dog is in that car. And he's not willing to let Gus jump off this train without Dog. So he puts on a last man hat, an armband, and heads in to grab Dog, where obviously he's caught. He tries to play it off like he's the last man, but he had no idea that he's wanted and they have his poster, so they recognize him. He barely makes his way to the last train, and him and Jimmy are holding off the last man. And Tommy tells Bear, take Gus, go. But both Gus and Bear say, we're not leaving you. We're all going to Colorado together. And that's when Jimmy decides that he's going to sacrifice himself for the betterment of this group. He says goodbye to his old buddy, and the trio hop off the train. And Jimmy is left to fight off 4 or 5 last men by himself. And he does a pretty good job. Gus, Bear, and Tommy start making their way to Go Grove. And Tommy tells Bear, I know you're heading down south, but if you want to tag along with us, you can. And Bear smiles and says, I'll think about it. But then Gus starts freaking out because they've arrived at Essex County. And that means they're not far from Go Grove. Over with Dr. Singh, it wasn't like General Abbott was there to save him. He was strictly there for the book. And after he finds it, he's heading out the door, leaving Dr. Singh and Ronnie to just sit there, tied up, and die. And that's when Ronnie says, if you let us die, you'll never have the cure. And that gets General Abbott to stop dead in his tracks. General Abbott then notices that Ronnie's finger is twitching, and Dr. Singh says she's not contagious, but General Abbott still covers his mouth. He then realizes that this must be the Jane Doe that Dr. Singh talks about in his research, the woman that he's experimenting on. He then has Dr. Singh tell him about this cure, and Dr. Singh makes up a lie that is extremely believable, telling General Abbott, it's not in that book. I have it. And in order to get it, you have to let us both go. Abbott then yells for a soldier named Johnny to come help both Dr. Singh and Ronnie pack because they're going to be moving them to, quote, better accommodations. He then whispers in Johnny's ear, don't screw this up. And it's obvious that Johnny has screwed stuff up in the past because he's got a mullet. In front of Johnny, though, Dr. Singh is freaking out a little bit. He yells at Ronnie, what are we going to do about Trixie, their horse? They're never going to let us bring her. And as Johnny is munching on Dr. Singh's Pop-Tarts, he says, who's Trixie? And that's when Dr. Singh asks, can me and my wife have a moment alone? He asks Ronnie, how on earth am I going to find a cure for the sick? Everyone's been looking for a cure for the last 10 years. And Ronnie says, I don't know, but what I do know is we have more time together now than we did this morning. They then pack up the rest of their stuff, they have hoods put over their heads, and they're loaded up into a van. And as they're leaving their cul-de-sac, Johnny whispers in Dr. Singh's ear, I let your horse go. It's free. And Dr. Singh thanks him for that. And finally, at the preserve, Amy thought she had way more time than this before the last men found him. She's trying to figure out what to do. She knows that if she takes the ribbons off, then that'll give a clear indication that someone is there. So she's kind of hoping that they just see them and they keep moving, not inspecting the area much. She tells Bobby, go check the tunnels, but whatever you do, don't get caught. She puts the entire zoo in lockdown, and she's freaking out a little bit, but then she realizes that she has to stay strong for Wendy. She promises Wendy, nothing will happen to you. But then Wendy can smell that there are people outside, and when they check the security camera, in fact, there is a last man just standing there. At this point, Amy knows she has to get the preserve to safety. She has Wendy and the rest of the hybrids pack up their stuff and head through underground tunnels. Amy then goes through the plan with Wendy, which is to follow the pipes, hide in the church, protect the others, and wait until Amy comes for them. Wendy then notices that Amy isn't coming with them, and she says, why aren't you coming? And Amy says, I have to stay behind in case the bad men come. Wendy's worried, though, that she messes things up, and Amy says, you won't, because you're Wendy. You're strong. You're my daughter. Now go. But before she does, Wendy makes Amy promise that she'll return for them, and Amy does. She then hugs Wendy, but then locks the tunnel closed, heading back up to the preserve and waiting with a gun in her lap for the 3 last men who are outside of the fence to come in. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought this sucked. Make sure to be nice in the comment section. If you don't see the next video up in the end screen there, I'll get it up in a few days, not to worry. And I have merchandise, so go buy a mug or something. It's never too early to think about Christmas gifts, folks. Once again, thank you for checking out this recap.